Hello, my name is Steve Owens, Studio Garden Manager for Oklahoma Gardening, and we're getting ready to show you how to build your very own rock garden for Oklahoma. Now, these gardens aren't typically seen here in Oklahoma because of our extreme summer heat, high humidity, and heavy clay soils. But we'll show you how to successfully overcome these obstacles with a few modifications and the selection of the right plant material. We'll go over such aspects as the history of rock gardening, choosing or constructing an appropriate site, creating a proper rock garden soil mix, construction of the rock garden detail, planting and plant selection, and also care and maintenance of a rock garden. It'll be a lot of work, but hopefully once you're finished, you'll have a garden that you're quite proud of and a place to grow some really interesting and unique types of plants. Before we get started, we need to take a trip back in time to explore the beginning of rock gardens. Rock gardening began in England in the 18th century, where a new style of gardening was becoming popular. This was the naturalistic or landscape style of gardening. People had begun to turn away from the rigid, straight line look of clipped hedges and parterres in favor of this more natural look. This new look was a direct observation of nature. The English would go out into the countryside and see bits of scenery that they fell in love with and would come back and try to duplicate these in their own gardens, whether it be a bubbling brook, a wildflower meadow, or even a small group of trees or shrubs. The more adventurous gardeners of these times were probably those that had been on trips through the mountains and seen little bits of rugged mountaintop scenery that they liked, and they brought these little pieces of scenery back and tried to build those in their own gardens. So all the rock gardens that we have today are the descendants of these first little mountaintop gardens. Our rock garden here at the studio grounds, as well as the one we're going to show you how to construct, are mimics of natural rock outcroppings that you might see around the state. In Oklahoma, two of the biggest limiting factors when it comes to growing these rock garden type plants are the extreme heat and also our heavy clay soils. Now, you've probably seen in a lot of plant books and descriptions of plants where it says this plant needs a well-drained soil. Well, this is important because oxygen in the root zone is important for all plants. But these rock garden type plants, it is absolutely essential that they have a well-drained soil and also a quickly draining soil. So to aid in the drainage and also to showcase the detail of the rock work, some sort of slope is needed for a rock garden. Now, an ideal existing slope would be one that is oriented towards or faces the east, kind of like the rock garden we have here at our studio grounds. Now, this will help with the heat problem in that little microclimates can be created with the shadows of the rock to help cool the plants off. For instance, this little plant right here, snuggled up against the east face of this rock, will get the benefit of the morning sun, but by 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to be shaded. That way it will avoid the hottest part of the day. So to make a rock garden, the first step is to select and prepare the site. Once you've selected the site on a slope, a good way to define the area is by using a garden hose. And you can just stretch this out, move it around till you've delineated the area. And this will help you distinguish which part of the area to spray and treat this with a non-selective herbicide and treat it maybe a few times to make sure you completely kill all of the vegetation. And once it's dead, you'll come in and cut away the sod. Then you will excavate down about 8 to 10 inches and replace that soil with our recommended well-drained soil mix to a depth of about 18 inches. So the ground level is actually going to be a little bit higher than when you started out. Now, that's if you have an existing slope, but if you don't, Now, if you don't already have an existing slope on your property, you can create one using our recommended soil mix and orient it so that it does slope toward the east. Now, on the back of the slope, you can mulch it real heavily, or you can plant it in some sort of ground cover, or what would be best would be to build some sort of retaining wall and have the soil sloping away from it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a well-drained soil is very important. And to create a well-drained soil, it's recommended to use equal parts of each of these three ingredients. This is compost. You could also use a well-composted animal manure. This is regular garden soil. For the eastern part of Oklahoma, I would recommend using a more sandy garden soil. And if you live in the western part, more of a loamy soil mix. And right here, this is a very coarse sand, or what we call grit. Some people may even call this a very small pea gravel, and you can see the particles are about the size of grape nut cereal. Well, you want to use equal amounts of each of these three ingredients in your mix. So we'll just take a few shovelfuls of each of these three ingredients. And I might add too that these are equal amounts by volume and not by weight, because the weight of the grit will weigh a lot more than the other two ingredients. We're going to put these in our wheelbarrow. Just mix those up real good. Now, if you're doing a very large rock garden, of course, you probably want to use some kind of soil mixer, or do this in the bucket of your front end loader. But once that's mixed up real good, you've got your well-drained soil mix, and now we're ready to go and work on laying out the detail of the rock. The most artistic part of building a rock garden is the actual placement of the rock, even more so than the planting, because in the wintertime, this is going to give you a lot of interest, even when not much is growing. Now, it's a good idea to study the rock outcrops around the state and to take pictures and get lots of ideas of how these formations occur. And if you look at enough of them, you'll notice that they occur in sort of shelves or layers. Now, these are layers of strata. So what we're going to do here, we're going to attempt to build a deteriorating line of strata. And you can see that I've got some little niches carved out in the soil where I'm going to place a few rocks to begin our line of strata. So now that we've got these few rocks set to begin our layer of strata, it's kind of a natural look. Now, one thing you want to avoid when you're trying to create a natural look of a rock formation is what we call the tombstone look. And that's when a rock is just placed haphazardly in the garden and it looks like you buried a pet there or something like that. That's what you want to avoid. Now, when it comes to setting these rocks in place, there are a couple of key things to remember. One of the most important is that you have the strata lines all running in the same direction. Now, each individual rock will have these lines. You can see these right here. But make sure they're all going the same direction. They can be horizontal, or like we've done here, we've added a little bit of a lift. Another thing to do is to be sure and tuck the soil up underneath the rock. And this will ensure that when those plant roots start growing up under there, they're not going to run into a pocket of air and dry out. So spend a lot of time, get that soil tucked really good up underneath the rocks. Now on the flat rocks, an important thing to remember is to have the surface of these rocks slanting backwards into the hill. Now the reason for this is that when the water from rainfall or irrigation will land on this and run backwards and seep into the soil, thus watering the plants. Now if you tilted this rock forward, the water would hit the surface, pick up speed, run over the top, and cause a lot more erosion problems. And finally, once the rock is in place, a good idea is to bury the rock by at least 1/3. So we're going to pull some soil down around the rock here to make it look like it's set here for years, and the rain and weathering has just kind of buried this rock a little bit. We didn't just plop it on the ground. Now you can see that we've left some gaps in our line of strata here, and we did that on purpose to make it look like it's weathered and deteriorated, and we can give this rock the look that it was once part of this line of strata, and then it broke free and tumbled into place right here. And this is a good thing to do with some of those unique rocks that you might find that have a lot of character, that you want to position with their best face forward. That way you don't have to pay attention to the strata lines. Now another neat thing to do when placing your rock is to create the look of a cracked or deteriorated rock. And I'll show you how to do that right down here. We'll take this rock, kind of snuggle it in there, and you see it's kind of got a flat face right here. And here's another one that has kind of a flat side, and we'll just position them right next to each other, and we'll make sure that their strata lines are still going in the same direction. And we'll just snuggle that one right up against that one. Again, bury them by about 1/3. And this creates just a great environment for plants, to plant some real small plants down in the crack of this rock. And it looks like it was once one big rock and it cracked over time. So keep working on your garden, adding more layers of strata, more pieces of rock that have tumbled into place, until you get quite a large number of rocks in here. And the garden should look interesting even before you plant your first plant. When it comes to choosing the rock for your garden, we recommend limestone or sandstone. Now limestone is calcium carbonate, and this is the same material that farmers use to lime their fields, and it can create a soil with a high pH or an alkaline soil. And that's okay because it'll still support quite a few different plants. But both sandstone and limestone are porous materials. They can have a lot of character, and they both support surface growth like mosses or lichen, kind of like we have right here with the moss and then the lichen right back here. Now these are highly desirable, and you don't want to scrape those off when you're handling or transporting the rock. And you also don't want to break or chip the rocks or scratch them up, because this can take away from their natural weathered look. Well, you can purchase your rock at stone yards or some nurseries or garden centers, or if you're lucky enough and own property with a lot of rock laying around or know someone who does, you can save quite an expense. Along with these savings, by collecting in one area, you also maintain consistency. And this is a good rule of thumb when you're out shopping at the stone yards and nurseries, to make sure that the rock all looks the same, to maintain that natural look. One other thing you don't want to do is to use sandstone and limestone or another type of rock in one garden. That wouldn't look very natural at all. And also use rocks that have all different sizes. And if you have access to heavy equipment, the larger rocks really make an impressive display. They look more natural and permanent because obviously it doesn't look like someone just went out and picked them up and plopped them into place. And you can also grow larger plant material because as the plants mature, they won't hide much of the rock. The most enjoyable part about putting together a rock garden is the actual arrangement and planting of the plants. And believe it or not, there's actually an order of the type of plants you put into the rock garden. The first group of these plants is the dwarf conifers. And these, because of their evergreen nature, will provide interest year-round, even in the wintertime. Some of the nicer ones that have worked well for us are the dwarf globe blue spruce. And you can see the nice blue glaucous color of this plant. Another nice one is the Wells dwarf chamaecyparis. You get this kind of crinkly, dark green look on a nice dwarf conifer. Another blue-colored dwarf conifer is the blue star juniper. And these have performed quite well for us. It gives you a kind of a little spiny leaf texture on the blue star juniper. So you can see there's several colors that you can add to your garden just from the foliage of these evergreens. With the sun-kissed arborvitae here, you actually get kind of a gold color. You can see the yellow in the fairly new leaves here. Another nice dwarf conifer is the dwarf Swiss mountain pine, and this is Mugo, Pinus mugo, variety Pumilio. And you want to be sure and get this dwarf Pumilio variety because the regular Mugo pine will get too large for you. So research these plants and make sure they're not going to get too large for your rock garden. The second group of plants that go into the rock garden are the dwarf deciduous shrubs and grasses. And this is also a good time to plant the dwarf evergreen shrubs as well, like this candy tuft right here. And you can argue if it's really a shrub or not. It's more of a ground cover, but in the springtime this is just covered with little white flowers. Our favorite deciduous shrub here in the garden is the magic carpet spirea. Now, this is a dwarf shrub that has beautiful pink flowers in late spring, and the new leaves come out in kind of a wine color and later change to more of a chartreuse or gold color. And it stays nice and compact. The grasses we've used in our garden on the steeper parts of the rock garden, and these help with the erosion. The grasses have very fibrous and thick root systems that helps hold the soil together and keeps it from eroding. This one is blue-gray sedge. So you can see there's another bluish color of plant material. Right back here, we have a red-colored grass, and this is Japanese bloodgrass. It also helps control the erosion in these steeper parts of the rock garden. The third group of plants to plant in the rock garden is probably the largest group of plants you're going to plant, and these are the perennials. The perennials are the group of plants that we have the most of here in our rock garden. And a nice one is this Bath's Pink dianthus. It's a very good dianthus for this warm part of the country here in Oklahoma, and you can see how the kind of the matte form of the plant kind of spills around and spills over and goes between these rocks. And in the springtime, it has very nice pink flowers. Another perennial dianthus that's performed very nicely for us is the firewitch dianthus. And another great perennial behind it right here is the tricolor sedum. Now this is a succulent, so it's not going to require as much water. The blue scabiosa, or pincushion flower, is a very nice perennial for the rock garden. Right down here we have the devil's paintbrush, these nice little yellowish orange daisies on a low mat forming perennial. And right here is a native zinnia, native to the southwestern part of Oklahoma. This is Zinnia grandiflora, nice perennial zinnia, and it's also quite drought tolerant. And right back here we have Red Rocks penstemon. All of these are very nice perennials for the rock garden. When designing with the perennials, there's several things to take into consideration. Think about the time of bloom for these plants. You don't want to have all of your spring flowering plants all clumped together versus having all your fall flowering plants all clumped together. Intermix these and spread them throughout the garden to provide lots of interest throughout all the seasons. Think about also the colors of the flowers. You can group the contrasting colors or complementary colors together, and also consider the color and texture of the foliage when designing with the perennials. Another group of plants that fit into this third group of perennials are the bulbs. And in Oklahoma, a well-drained rock garden is the perfect place to grow many kinds of bulbs. There are spring and fall flowering crocus, miniature daffodils, miniature iris, alliums, and also oxalis, like this one right here, little pink shamrock plant. And we recommend that you make up some kind of a map for your bulb planting, and that way later in the year when you're wanting to come in and plant a few new plants, you won't dig up your dormant bulbs. A fourth group of plants that you may or may not want to plant in your rock garden are annuals. And these can provide a lot of color, especially in the first year or two while your perennials are establishing themselves. Now, a lot of these will reseed themselves, so every year all you have to do is thin out the ones you don't want and leave the ones that are growing in a nice location. And some of the annuals that do that for us in our rock garden are the cup flowers. This is a white one called Mont Blanc. And right over here on the other side of the pathway we have purple robe. It's a nice purple color. And every once in a while here in Oklahoma, these will actually overwinter as perennials even. Another really nice one is the rose moss or portulaca. It comes up where it wants to. And probably our favorite reseeding annual is the Dalberg daisy. These nice little yellow daisies that seem to pop up where they want. And we didn't plant this one here, it just popped up right in between these two paving stones, and it seems to look just right at home there, so we left it. Another annual that doesn't reseed itself each year, but we plant anyway because it looks so nice, is the Stewart's Desert Pea. This is an Australian wildflower that does well here in Oklahoma, provided that you put it in a very well-drained soil, like our rock garden here. If you have room in your rock garden, a pathway is a good idea because it lends itself very well in creating little pockets and nooks and crannies for these tiny little rock garden type plants to establish themselves. Like the rupturewort right here. It looks right at home, just kind of creeping between these two flat stepping stones. And in places, it's only about an inch high, so it makes a very low green mat. Another one that works really well for us is the golden speedwell. And you can see how it kind of spills around and through the edges of the pathway down below here. And also dwarf mondo grass makes a really nice filler between stepping stones as well. So experiment with different kinds of plants to see what's going to grow well for you. Be sure and not plant any plants that are going to get too tall and hide the rocks. Also try to stay away from those that are going to be invasive. Be sure and plant those heat-sensitive plants on the east side of the rocks so they'll be shaded in the afternoon. And be creative, and most of all, have fun. Planting on a slope is a lot different than planting on flat ground. To ensure that the water is going to soak down into the root zone of the plant, you need to build some type of little moat. And I'm going to demonstrate how to do this when I plant this little fire witch dianthus. First thing you're going to do is dig the hole like you normally would. A little bit bigger than the root ball of the plant. I'm going to take and pop this out of the pot, rough up the roots a little bit. Try to get the soil level about the same level as the surrounding soil. Tuck this soil around the plant, kind of firm it in. Put a little bit of soil up on the root ball. And then, with this extra soil from the hole, on the downhill side of the plant, we want to just kind of firm it around and basically build a little moat or a little berm or an earthen dam. And that way, once it rains or when you're using irrigation water, the water will soak in around the root zone of the plant. And after a while, this dam will wear away, but by that time the plant should be nice and established. Once the rock garden is completely planted, it may need frequent watering until the plants establish themselves. Now, when applying the water, you don't want to leave a sprinkler going in one particular area for an extended period of time because you may cause some erosion problems. To minimize this problem, we recommend an intermittent watering pattern. A mulch of crushed rock is beneficial if you can find a source, but if you can't, you can just use an inch or two of the same grit that you used in the soil mix. The springtime display is when the rock garden will really shine, and you want to be ready for this by having all the perennials cut back, all of those winter weeds pulled out, and clean up any little pockets of leaf litter or debris, because you don't want your garden looking shabby when all those little bulbs start waking up and all those little springtime perennials start to bloom. For the rest of the season, just remember to keep those reseeding annuals thinned back, remove any bulb foliage as it turns yellow, keep the summer weeds pulled out, remove any dead flowers, and you should be rewarded with a nice clean rock garden. You can find out more information about specific plants and other rock gardening details in the extension publication, Rock Gardening in Oklahoma. Well, we hope we've given you the information for a successful rock garden, and maybe now you'll be able to grow some of those interesting and unique plants that you've never tried before. Be very careful when working with the rocks. Please take your time and enjoy yourself creating your very own mountaintop garden right here in Oklahoma.